Hello there, how are you tonight? Feeling a little restless, mind buzzing with thoughts? Well then, let me take you somewhere. Dry. Very dry. A place where the wind hums through stone corridors and the sand never quite settles. A place where power was heavy, rituals were endless, and even the gods got bored sometimes. Tonight, we drift back thousands of years to the golden but exhausting age of ancient Egypt. Not the exciting parts with treasure and curses. No, we're going deeper into the slow, ceremonial, disturbingly repetitive life of the pharaohs. The divine rulers who couldn't sneeze without a priest writing a hymn about it. So tuck yourself in, let your eyelids grow heavy, and prepare to be lulled by the monotony of royal duties, the scratch of linen robes, and the eternal hum of bureaucratic eternity. This is not a tale of adventure, it's a tale of obligation, of yawns disguised as chance, of naps interrupted by sacred onions. Welcome to the story, welcome to the sand, welcome to the disturbingly sleepy life of the pharaohs. From the disturbing life of pharaohs in ancient Egypt, the sand was always there. It didn't arrive, it didn't depart, it simply existed, an eternal beige blanket draped across the land, whispering dry secrets to the wind. It filled the cracks in temple walls, settled into the folds of linen robes, and crept into the nostrils of every unfortunate soul who dared to breathe too deeply. The Nile, sluggish and predictable, slithered through the desert like a tired serpent. It brought life, yes, but also mosquitoes, and humidity, and the constant need to appease Harpy, the god of inundation, who was rumored to be particularly fond of stale bread and awkwardly performed dances. In the heart of this dusty kingdom sat the palace. Not a cozy palace, not a cheerful one. It was made of stone cold, echoing, and designed more for intimidation than comfort. The throne room was vast, but not inviting. The walls were carved with scenes of conquest, divine birth, and the occasional goose. No one knew why the goose was there. It had been there for centuries. The scribes refused to remove it, and on the throne sat the pharaoh. He was not smiling. Pharaohs did not smile. Smiling was instead, he stared forward with the practiced blankness of someone who had been trained to look important since infancy. His crown was heavy, his wig was itchy, his sandals were too tight, but he couldn't say anything because sandals were sacred. He blinked, slowly, deliberately. Each blink was recorded by the royal scribe, who sat cross-legged beside the throne with a tally sheet made of papyrus. The scribe had been tallying blinks for 32 years. His fingers were permanently inked. He had developed a twitch in his left eye, which he insisted was a sign of divine favor. The pharaoh's day had begun, as it always did, with the ceremonial awakening. This involved 3 priests, 2 incense burners, a chorus of temple singers, and a goat. The goat was symbolic. No one remembered what it symbolized, but it had a name Nebtuand, a tendency to chew on sacred scrolls. The ritual lasted 47 minutes and involved chanting the same phrase repeatedly, Ra, Rizzes, and so must the divine. The pharaoh had heard it over 17,000 times. He had counted. After the awakening came the washing, not a normal bath. That would be too simple. The royal washing involved water from the Nile, filtered through 7 layers of linen, poured by virgins who had fasted for 3 days. The water was lukewarm. The linen was scratchy. The virgins were tired. The pharaoh endured it in silence, staring at a wall carving of a falcon wearing a crown. Then came the anointing. Oils were applied, frankincense, myrrh, and something called divine balm, which smelled suspiciously like onions. The oils were rubbed into the pharaoh's scalp, shoulders, and elbows. Elbows were considered spiritually significant. No one knew why. The priests insisted it was written in the Book of Elbows, a sacred text that had been lost in a flood. By the time the rituals were complete, the sun had risen fully. The pharaoh was exhausted. He hadn't done anything, but he was tired. His throne awaited. So did the audience. So did the scrolls. So did the endless parade of officials with complaints about grain, taxes, and the behavior of sacred cats. He sighed, quietly. The scribe recorded the sigh. Outside, the sand shifted. It didn't care about rituals. It didn't care about crowns. It simply moved, grain by grain, whispering to itself in a language no one understood. The sand never slept, and neither, it seemed, did the pharaoh. Was born on a Tuesday. This was considered auspicious by some, and deeply troubling by others. Tuesdays were ruled by Mars, the god of war, except in Egypt, where Mars didn't exist, and the priests argued about whether the stars even mattered. One priest claimed the pharaoh's birth coincided with the rising of Syria. Another insisted it was the falling of a sacred ibis. A third simply nodded and said, "Yes, very divine." From the moment of birth, the child was not a child. He was a symbol, a vessel, a tiny, wrinkled. He was wrapped in ceremonial linen, placed in a golden crib shaped like a lotus, and assigned a team of 20 caretakers. Each caretaker had a specific role, one for feeding, one for bathing, one for interpreting cries, one for measuring the angle of his yawns. The yawns were important. Yawns were believed to be messages from the gods. A wide yawn meant approval from Osiris. A short yawn meant disapproval from Best. A sideways yawn was considered a prophecy, though no one could agree on what it foretold. The royal yawn interpreter kept a scroll of all recorded yawns. It was 73 feet long and mostly unreadable. As the child grew, so did the rituals. He was not allowed to play. Sitting was sacred. He sat on miniature thrones, carved from obsidian and decorated with tiny cobras. He sat in silence, while priests chanted around him. He sat, while scribes read aloud the history of Egypt, starting from the first dynasty and continuing until everyone fell asleep. He was taught to walk, but only ceremonially. Each step had meaning. The left foot symbolized justice. The right foot symbolized divine will. If he stumbled, it was considered an omen. Once, he tripped over a ceremonial rug and 3 temples were closed for purification. The rug was burned. The ashes were buried beneath a statue of Horus. Speech was another matter. The pharaoh was not allowed to speak freely. His first words were scripted. He was taught to say, "I am the son of Ra, the light of the 2 lands." He repeated this phrase daily, even when he wanted to ask for figs. Asking for figs was considered mundane. Divine beings did not crave figs. They craved eternal order. His tutors were strict. There was the high priest of Thoth, who taught him writing, the royal historian, who taught him dates, the sacred mathematician, who taught him how to count offerings, and the chief etiquette master, who taught him how to nod correctly. Nodding was an art. Too fast, and it seemed impatient. Too slow, and it seemed sleepy. The perfect nod took years to master. By the age of 7, the pharaoh had attended 1,200 ceremonies. He had been anointed 300 times. He had worn 47 different crowns. He had sat through 89 hours of hymns. He had not played with a single toy. Toys were forbidden, except for an ivory rattle shaped like a scarab. It was ceremonial. It made no sound. At night, he slept in a chamber lined with gold. The walls were painted with stars. The ceiling showed the goddess Nut stretching across the sky. Incense burned constantly. A priest stood watch in case the pharaoh had divine dreams. If he did, they were recorded. If he didn't, the priest invented one. Dreams were required, even if they were about sand. And always, the expectations loomed. He was to be wise. He was to be strong. He was to be divine. He was to be everything, all the time, without ever being allowed to simply be. The pharaoh was born to rule, but never to rest. The sun had not yet risen, but the palace was already awake. Servants shuffled quietly through the stone corridors, carrying incense, scrolls, and ceremonial sandals. Priests murmured to one another in hushed tones, their voices echoing like distant bees. The air was thick with anticipation and dust, mostly dust. In the royal chamber, the pharaoh sat upright on his ceremonial bed. He had not slept well. He never did. The mattress was made of woven reeds, which was sacred but uncomfortable. Pillows were filled with sand, which was symbolic but scratchy. The room smelled of myrrh and obligation. It was time for the morning hymn of Ra. This was not a short hymn. It was not a cheerful hymn. It was a hymn designed to honor the sun god Ra, who rose each day in his solar boat and sailed across the sky, only to descend into the underworld at night and fight serpents. The hymn was meant to encourage Ra, to remind him of his duties, and to ensure he didn't forget to rise. The pharaoh's role was crucial. He had to sit perfectly still, face in ease, with his hands positioned in the divine receptacle, palms up, elbows slightly bent, fingers relaxed but reverent. This pose had been standardized during the 5th dynasty. Deviations were frowned upon. The hymn began. A chorus of temple singers entered the chamber, dressed in white linen and wearing wigs that smelled faintly of onions. They formed a semicircle around the pharaoh and began to chant, Ra, mighty Ra, golden Ra, you rise, you shine, we shine, you burn, we burn, you glow, we glow, you are the light, the heat, the breath, the bread, the eternal flame, the sacred beam, the divine gleam. This went on for a while. Each verse was followed by a pause, during which incense was waved in the pharaoh's direction. The incense was made from crushed lotus petals, dried crocodile tears, and something called sun powder, which no one could identify. It made the pharaoh sneeze. Sneezing was not allowed. He held it in. The hymn continued. Ra, who sails the sky in your boat of fire, who battles Apophis with your spear of light, who blesses the barley and curses the locust, who watches the two lands with your radiant eye. The pharaoh blinked. Slowly, the scribe recorded it. After the 12th verse, the high priest of Ra stepped forward. He carried the sacred scroll of dawn, which was longer than a crocodile and twice as boring. He read aloud from it in a voice that sounded like sandpaper rubbing against stone. And look, Ra did rise, and the people did rejoice, and the cattle did moo, and the grain did sway, and the pharaoh did nod, and the scribes did scribble. The pharaoh nodded. The scribe scribbled. The hymn lasted 47 minutes. During this time, the pharaoh was not allowed to move, speak, or think impure thoughts. Thinking about figs was considered impure. Thinking about naps was borderline heretical. Thinking about not thinking was paradoxical and therefore discouraged. At the end of the hymn, the singers bowed. The priests bowed. The goat bowed. The goat had wandered in halfway through the ceremony and was now chewing on a corner of the sacred scroll. No one stopped it. The goat was considered sacred. The pharaoh was anointed with sun oil. This was a mixture of olive oil, crushed gold flakes, and something that smelled like regret. It was dabbed onto his forehead, his elbows, and his left knee. The right knee was reserved for evening rituals. The sun finally rose. Ra had done his duty. The hymn had worked. The pharaoh could now begin his day, which involved more rituals, more scrolls, and more sitting. But for a brief moment, as the sunlight touched his face, the pharaoh allowed himself a single thought. Ah, Miss Figs, breakfast in the palace was not a feast. It was a ritual, and like most rituals, it was repetitive, dry, and oddly The pharaoh sat at his breakfast table, which was not really a table, but a low stone slab carved with symbols of fertility and grain. A servant placed a loaf of bread before him. It was hard, very hard. It had been baked in a sacred oven, untouched by mortal hands. It tasted like limestone and duty. Next came the beer, not the frothy kind. This was ceremonial beer, thick, warm, and brewed with barley, dates, and something called divine sediment. It was served in a clay cup shaped like a lotus. The pharaoh sipped it slowly. It tasted like yesterday. Then came the onions. Always the onions. They were sliced, roasted, pickled, and sometimes just raw. Onions were sacred. They symbolized eternity. They also caused indigestion. The pharaoh chewed carefully, trying not to grimace. Grimacing was A priest stood nearby, reciting the hymn of digestive harmony. It was meant to bless the pharaoh's stomach. It did not help. Breakfast lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it ended, the pharaoh nodded. The scribe recorded the nod. The servants bowed. The goat sneezed. And the day moved forward, one bland bite at a time. After breakfast, the pharaoh was escorted to the Hall of Scrolls. It was a long walk, not because the hall was far, but because ceremonial walking required pauses every 7 steps. At each pause, a priest whispered, "May your feet honor the land." The pharaoh's feet were tired. The hall itself was vast and echoing. Scrolls lined the walls, stacked in baskets, piled on tables, and occasionally used as cushions, though that was frowned upon. Each scroll contained a request, a complaint, or a report. Most were about grain. The pharaoh sat on his throne. It was still uncomfortable. Officials entered one by one, bowing deeply and presenting their scrolls. The first was about a dispute over barley. The second was about a missing goat. The third was about a priest who had sneezed during a ritual and caused panic in a village. The pharaoh nodded. Slowly, the scribe recorded each nod. Sometimes, the pharaoh was asked to speak. He said things like, "Let justice be done," or "Consult the stars," or "Bring me more onions." These phrases were considered wise. even if they didn't solve anything. The audience lasted 3 hours. By the end, the pharaoh's eyes were glazed, his neck ached, his soul felt slightly papyrus-scented. But the scrolls kept coming. They always did. Outside, the sand shifted. Inside, the scrolls multiplied, and the pharaoh nodded. Again, the vizier was the pharaoh's most trusted advisor. He was also the most unsettling. He stood beside the throne, always slightly too close, with a scroll in one hand and a look of quiet judgment in the other. But what truly disturbed the pharaoh were the vizier's eyebrows. They were thick, they were arched, they were symmetrical in a way that felt unnatural. Rumors swirled that he trimmed them with a ceremonial blade blessed by Thoth. Others claimed he used crushed lotus paste to shape them. One scribe believed the eyebrows were fake woven from sacred goat hair. The vizier never blinked. He read scrolls aloud in a voice that sounded like distant thunder. He paused dramatically. He raised one eyebrow when displeased. He raised both when amused. He rarely raised both. The pharaoh tried not to stare, but it was difficult. The eyebrows seemed to move independently, like twin cobras sizing up their prey. During one particularly long grain dispute, the pharaoh found himself counting the hairs. He lost track at No one dared question the vizier. He knew everything: tax records, temple schedules, the number of onions consumed last month. He once corrected a priest's pronunciation of papyrus and caused a minor theological crisis. At night, the pharaoh dreamed of eyebrows. They hovered above him, judging his posture, his sandals, his ceremonial size. He awoke in a sweat, whispering, "Balance the grain." The vizier was waiting outside. He raised one eyebrow. The pharaoh nodded. Linen was sacred. Linen was pure. Linen was itchy. The pharaoh wore linen every day, fine bleached and woven by temple virgins who sang to the thread. It was said that the gods themselves favored linen, and that wool was an abomination punishable by mild frowning. But no one warned the pharaoh about the itch. It began just to tickle behind the knee during a morning offering, then a persistent scratch along the ribs during a falcon ceremony. By midday, the pharaoh was shifting in his throne like a beetle on hot sand. He summoned the royal tailor. "Is this linen cursed?" the pharaoh asked. The tailor bowed. "It is blessed, your majesty." "Then why does it feel like ants are dancing on my spine?" The tailor wept with pride. "That is the sacred sensation of purity." The pharaoh was unconvinced. He tried remedies: papyrus, ointment, lotus balm, sand exfoliation. He even considered nudity, but the vizier raised both eyebrows. The priests insisted the itch was divine. "It is the gods reminding you to remain humble," they said. "Also, to moisturize." One day, during a festival, the pharaoh scratched so vigorously that a dove flew off his shoulder and refused to return. The crowd gasped. The vizier raised one eyebrow. The pharaoh pretended it was a dance. Eventually, he accepted the itch. It became part of his rule, a constant reminder that even the most powerful must endure discomfort. He scratched with dignity. He scratched with grace. He scratched with a ceremonial stick carved from sacred cedar. And thus, the legend of the itchy pharaoh was born. The pharaoh loved animals. The animals did not love the pharaoh. Royal pets were symbols of divine favor. Every creature had a purpose. Baboons were sacred to Thoth. Crocodiles represented Sobek. Cats were just cats, mysterious, aloof, and probably plotting something. The palace was a zoo of chaos. The baboon, named Scribbles, was trained to clap during ceremonies. He clapped at inappropriate times during funerals, grain audits, and once when the pharaoh sneezed. The vizier claimed it was a sign of divine approval. The pharaoh suspected mockery. The crocodile, Nibble, lived in a golden tub. It was fed honey-soaked fish and occasionally a sandal. It escaped twice. One time, it was found in the royal bath. The pharaoh didn't bathe for a week. Then there was the cat. Her name was Queen Whiskereth, and she ruled the palace with silent tyranny. She sat on scrolls, knocked over sacred oils, and stared into the souls of visiting diplomats. Once, she climbed onto the pharaoh's head during a moon ritual. The priests declared it a blessing. The pharaoh declared it uncomfortable. But the true curse was emotional. The pets ignored the pharaoh's affection. Scribbles preferred the scribe. Nibble hissed at the royal harpist. Queen Whiskereth only purred for the vizier. The pharaoh tried everything: treats made of figs and gold dust, a lullaby composed by temple musicians, a miniature throne for Queen One night, The pharaoh dreamed of being chased by baboons riding crocodiles, led by a cat wearing his crown. He awoke in terror. The cat was on his chest. She blinked. He blinked. She sneezed. The pharaoh accepted his fate. He ruled Egypt, but the pets ruled him. The pharaoh had one final wish, a tomb that would echo his greatness. Instead, it echoed his knees. The royal architect Ptahhotep, the confident, promised a masterpiece. "It shall pierce the heavens," he declared. "It shall humble the stars." It did not. Due to a miscalculation involving cubits, shadows, and a distracted baboon, the tomb was built slightly too small. Not catastrophically small, just enough to be annoying. The sarcophagus fit, but barely. The walls were majestic, but close. The ceiling was low enough to make the pharaoh duck. "This is cozy," the pharaoh said, trying to sound regal. The vizier raised one eyebrow. The priests tried to spin it. "It symbolizes humility," they said, "an efficient use of limestone." The pharaoh was unconvinced. He tested the tomb early lying inside while musicians played mournful flutes. His elbow touched the wall. His crown scraped the ceiling. His spider crawled across his nose. "This is not majestic," he whispered. But Ptahhotep wept. "It is snug, your eternity." The pharaoh considered exile, or at least a stern letter, but the tomb was already inscribed, sealed, and blessed. Undoing it would anger the gods, the masons, and the spider. So he made adjustments. A smaller crown, a curled-up burial pose, a decree that future tombs must include wiggle room. When he finally passed into the afterlife, he arrived slightly stiff. The gods welcomed him. He stretched. They offered him a cloud. He asked, "Is it spacious?" They nodded. He sighed with relief, and thus the legend of the cramped tomb became a cautionary tale for architects, pharaohs, and anyone who values elbow space in eternity. Every year, the people of Egypt celebrated the festival of statues. No one knew why. It began centuries ago, when a priest tripped over a sculpture and declared it divine. Since then, the tradition grew. Statues were polished, paraded, and occasionally mistaken for relatives. The pharaoh presided over the festival with ceremonial grace and internal bewilderment. There were too many statues, one of a falcon with suspiciously human feet, one of a scribe holding a fish, one of the pharaoh himself, but with a beard he never had. The priests claimed each statue represented a god, a virtue, or a metaphor. The metaphors were unclear. One statue was labeled justice, but looked like a man sneezing. The people didn't mind. They danced around the statues, offered figs, and sang songs with lyrics like, "O mighty stone, you do not blink, but we blink for you." The pharaoh tried to ask questions. "Who is this statue?" he asked, pointing to a three-headed jackal. "Possibly Anubis," the priest replied, "or possibly regret." The vizier raised both eyebrows. The pharaoh nodded solemnly. During the grand parade, the statues were carried through the streets. One toppled onto a merchant's cart. Another was stolen by a baboon. A third was revealed to be a pile of laundry. Still, the festival continued. The pharaoh gave a speech. "Let us honor these sacred shapes, whose meanings are mysterious, but whose presence is undeniable." The crowd cheered. The statues remained silent. And thus, the festival of confusing statues endured proof that meaning is optional, but celebration is eternal. The pharaoh had no beard. This was a problem. In ancient Egypt, beards were symbols of power, wisdom, and divine masculinity. Even the gods had beards, long, braided, and suspiciously well-conditioned. So the pharaoh wore a fake beard. It was made of gold, attached with beeswax, and shaped like a question mark. It itched. It wobbled. It once fell off during a blessing, landing in a bowl of sacred lentils. The priests gasped. The vizier raised one eyebrow. The pharaoh pretended it was a ritual. He tried alternatives. A linen beard, a wooden beard, a painted-on beard. The royal sculptors carved his statues with exaggerated chin fuzz. One depicted him with a beard so long it curled around his feet. Tourists were impressed. The pharaoh was confused. He asked the high priest, "Must I wear this?" The priest replied, "Without the beard, you are merely mortal." The pharaoh sighed. "But with the beard, I am itchy." The priest nodded. Such is divinity. During one festival, the pharaoh attempted a bold move. No beard. He appeared burchened, radiant, and slightly nervous. The crowd gasped. A child cried. A goat fainted. The vizier raised both eyebrows. The pharaoh quickly reapplied the beard. From that day forward, he accepted his fate. He wore the beard with pride, discomfort, and a small stick for scratching. He even commissioned a backup beard just in case of lentils. And thus, the royal beard dilemma became a tale of identity, tradition, and the eternal struggle between appearance and comfort. Sand was sacred. Sand was eternal. Sand was everywhere. The pharaoh lived in a palace of stone, surrounded by gardens, fountains, and guards with feathered fans. Yet somehow, sand infiltrated every corner of his life. It was in his sandals. It was in his scrolls. It was in his soup. He summoned the royal sweeper, cleansed the palace. He commanded. They swept. They dusted. They chanted to the god of cleanliness. The sand returned. He blamed the wind. He blamed the priests. He blamed the baboon. The baboon clapped. One morning, he awoke with sand in his ear. One afternoon, he found sand in his ceremonial wig. One evening, he sneezed and created a minor sandstorm. The vizier suggested acceptance. Sand is the breath of the desert, he said, also exfoliating. The pharaoh was unconvinced. He tried solutions. A moat filled with oil, a dome made of papyrus, a decree banning sand during a diplomatic visit. A foreign dignitary complimented the palace's textured ambience. The pharaoh smiled politely while sand trickled down his robe. He consulted the priests. "Why must sand torment me?" he asked. They replied, "It is the reminder that all things return to dust." He replied, "Can dust be less itchy?" They offered incense. It smelled like sand. Eventually, the pharaoh surrendered. He embraced the grit. He walked barefoot. He wrote poetry titled, "O Grain of My Discontent." He even named a statue Lord Set. And thus, the legend of the sand-plagued pharaoh was born, a tale of persistence, humility, and the eternal truth that sand always wins. Mummification was sacred, precise, ritualistic, and occasionally rebellious. The pharaoh had ordered the finest embalming team in Egypt. They arrived with oils, amulets, and a suspicious amount of enthusiasm. The process began with reverence. Then came the linen, layer after layer. The pharaoh was wrapped like a divine burrito. The priests chanted. The vizier raised one eyebrow. The baboon clapped. But something went wrong. The linen wouldn't stay put. It slipped. It unraveled during the final blessing, revealing one royal knee and a deeply unamused expression. The high embalmer gasped. The linen rejects him. The priests panicked. "Is he cursed?" The pharaoh grumbled. "I'm itchy." They tried again. Tighter wrapping, sacred glue. Binding spells, the mummy continued to unravel. One night, the pharaoh's ghost appeared in a dream to complain. "I look like a half-finished scroll," he said. "Fix it." The priests held an emergency ritual. They used enchanted thread, divine knots, and a backup linen blessed by 3 cats. It held for a week. Then came the festival. During the grand procession, the mummy was paraded through the streets. The crowd cheered. The linen slipped. The pharaoh's foot waved at the people. The vizier raised both eyebrows. The baboon clapped. Eventually, the priests gave up. They declared the mummy symbolically unwrapped, a metaphor for transparency and vulnerability in leadership. The pharaoh was buried with extra linen, just in case. And thus, the tale of the unraveling mummy became legend, a story of dignity, defiance, and the eternal struggle between fabric and fate. It happened during the festival of eternal balance. The air was thick with incense. The priests chanted. The pharaoh sneezed. Not a polite sneeze, not a ceremonial sneeze, a thunderous, soul-shaking, scroll rattling at you. The crowd froze. The baboon dropped his tambourine. The vizier raised both eyebrows and one scroll. The high priest gasped. "It is a sign." "What kind of sign?" the pharaoh asked, dabbing his nose with sacred linen. The priests conferred. They consulted the stars, the sand, and a goat. The goat sneezed too. This was taken as confirmation, they declared. The sneeze was a message from the gods, possibly a warning, possibly a blessing, possibly indigestion. The pharaoh was unconvinced. He tried to explain. "It's just dust. There's always dust." The priests ignored him. They began a new ritual, the ceremony of the divine nasal wind. It involved waving feathers, whispering to onions, sacrificing a scroll. The pharaoh sneezed again. This time, a dove flew off a statue. A child dropped a fig. The baboon clapped. The priests panicked. The gods are doubling their message. The pharaoh sighed. Can the gods send a message with less mucus? They could not. From that day forward, sneezing was considered sacred. The pharaoh's sneeze was recorded in hieroglyphs. It was interpreted as "Beware the windy nose." The pharaoh was given a new title. He who blows truth through his face, he accepted it with dignity. And a handkerchief. The Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt, majestic, predictable, divine. Until it wasn't. It began on a Tuesday. The pharaoh stood on the riverbank, ready to perform the ceremony of liquid gratitude. He wore his finest linen, held a golden ladle, and recited the sacred poem. "O Nile, you flow with grace, through sand and fish, and time and face." The river burped, not a gentle ripple, a full, gurgling, fish-flipping burp. The priests gasped. The vizier raised one eyebrow. The baboon clapped. The pharaoh blinked. Did the river just respond? The high priest whispered, "It is moody." The Nile began to misbehave. It flowed backward for 7 minutes. It turned slightly green. It spat out a sandal from last year's festival. The priests scrambled to appease it. They offered figs, incense, a poem rewritten to flatter the river's curves. The Nile ignored them. A crocodile named Nibble emerged, wearing a wreath. He blinked at the pharaoh, sneezed, and returned to the depths. This was interpreted as a warning or a fashion statement. The pharaoh tried diplomacy. He stood knee-deep in the water and declared, "O Nile, I honor your moods, but please, stop burping." The river gurgled again. The baboon clapped. Eventually, the priests declared the Nile was expressing its seasonal emotions. They added a new ritual, the ceremony of aquatic empathy, which involved crying into the river and complimenting its flow. The pharaoh complied. The Nile calmed. And thus, the tale of the moody Nile became legend, a reminder that even rivers have feelings, and sometimes they just need to burp. The pharaoh wanted a pyramid that touched the sky. The architect delivered too well. But Ahotep, the overachiever, designed a marvel taller than any before, gleaming with polished limestone and crowned with a tip so sharp it could slice a cloud. The priests gasped. The vizier raised both eyebrows. The baboon wore a helmet. The pyramid was unveiled during the Festival of Ascension. Doves were released. One collided with the tip and fell dramatically. The crowd cheered. The pharaoh winced. "This is majestic," he said, squinting upward, also mildly threatening. The architect beamed. "It is the pinnacle of geometry." It was also a hazard, 2 birds, a lightning magnet, a source of daily priestly nosebleeds. The tip was so pointy that it cast a judgmental shadow, long, narrow, and unsettling. It stretched across the palace at noon, making the pharaoh feel like he was constantly being scolded by architecture. One night, a star grazed the tip. The priests declared it a cosmic handshake. The pharaoh declared it a bit much. He summoned Ptahhotep. "Can we soften the point?" The architect wept. "Blasphemy." They tried. A golden cap, a fig-shaped ornament, a ceremonial wig. Eventually, they left it as it was. The pharaoh adjusted his festivals to avoid standing directly beneath it. He wore taller crowns to compete. He commissioned a poem titled, "O Sharpness, Thou art my rival," and thus the tale of the 2-pointy pyramid became legend, a story of ambition, geometry, and the eternal truth that even greatness can poke you in the eye. The pharaoh dreamed often of stars, rivers, and occasionally dancing onions. He needed guidance. He got Tefnut the literal. Tefnut was Egypt's most enthusiastic dream interpreter. She believed dreams were not symbolic. They were instructions. The pharaoh once dreamed of a goat eating a scroll. Tefnut brought him a goat. It ate the royal tax records. Another time, he dreamed of flying. Tefnut built wings from papyrus and feathers. The pharaoh fell off the palace roof. The baboon clapped. He dreamed of drowning in figs. Tefnut filled his bath with figs. He sneezed for 3 days. The priests grew concerned. The vizier raised both eyebrows and a fireproof scroll. The pharaoh remained polite. "I dreamed of a talking crocodile," he said one morning. Tefnut nodded. "We must find one." They did. It hissed. The pharaoh lost a sandal. He tried to explain. "Perhaps dreams are metaphors." Tefnut gasped. "Metaphors are lies." She began interpreting dreams for others. A scribe dreamed of falling. Tefnut pushed him gently. A merchant dreamed of gold. She buried him in coins. A priest dreamed of silence. She gagged him. The palace grew nervous. One night, the pharaoh dreamed of peace. Tefnut brought him a pillow, a dove, and a scroll labeled "Peace Treaty with the Moon." It was oddly comforting. Eventually, the pharaoh reassigned a tefnut to symbolic gardening, where she interpreted plant dreams. The fig tree was reportedly anxious, and thus the tale of the literal dream interpreter became legend, a story of devotion, confusion, and the eternal reminder that not every goat is a prophecy. The ceremony of divine footsteps was sacred. The pharaoh walked from the temple to the river, wearing ceremonial sandals blessed by 7 priests and 1 mildly confused goat. But one morning, the sandals were missing. The palace erupted. The high priest gasped, "The gods will be barefootly offended." The vizier raised both eyebrows and one sandal-shaped diagram. The baboon clapped, wearing one of the sandals. The pharaoh demanded answers. The royal sandal keeper wept. "They were here last night. I tucked them in." The priests searched. Under the altar inside the sacred urn beneath the baboon they found a fig, a scroll about onions, a camel named chewing something suspicious. The pharaoh approached Smirkus. "Have you seen my sandals?" Smirkus blinked slowly, then spat out a strap. The priests panicked. The ceremony must proceed. They offered replacements: papyrus slippers, golden boots, bare feet. The pharaoh chose dignity. He wore backup sandals, less sacred, slightly squeaky. As he walked, the crowd murmured. A child pointed. The baboon clapped. The gods did not smite him. Instead, a gentle breeze carried a sandal from the sky, landing perfectly at his feet. The priests declared it a miracle. The pharaoh declared it finally. Smirkus winked, and thus the tale of the misplaced sandals became legend, a story of panic, footwear, and the eternal truth that even sacred ceremonies depend on good arch support. The scroll was ancient, wrapped in silk, sealed with wax, stored in the vault of eternal insight. The priests believed it contained divine wisdom, perhaps the secret to immortality, or the meaning of dreams, or instructions for folding linen without divine wrath. The pharaoh gathered his court. The vizier raised both eyebrows. The baboon clapped. The high priest unrolled the scroll. It read, "Take 3 figs, crush with sacred garlic, add a dash of cumin, stir under moonlight, serve with The room fell silent. The pharaoh blinked. "Is this a recipe?" The priest stammered. "It must be metaphorical." The royal philosopher leaned in. "Perhaps the figs represent time, the garlic represents truth, and the cumin, destiny." The pharaoh was unconvinced. The royal chef was summoned. He followed the scroll precisely. The result, a surprisingly delicious dip. The pharaoh tasted it. "This is divine." The priests panicked. "We've consumed sacred knowledge." The baboon licked the bowl. The vizier raised one eyebrow and requested seconds. The scroll was reclassified as culinary enlightenment. A new temple was built, the temple of flavor and thought. Pilgrims came to taste wisdom. One scribe wrote a hymn titled "O Dib of Destiny." The philosopher insisted the dip cured his back pain. The priest claimed it made him dream of onions. The camel sneezed. Eventually, the pharaoh declared, "Let all scrolls be read carefully. Some truths are spicy." And thus, the tale of the accidental recipe scroll became legend, a story of mistaken meaning, unexpected flavor, and the eternal truth that wisdom sometimes comes with garlic. After years of ruling, scheming, dreaming, and occasionally screaming, the pharaoh was tired. Not just "I need a nap" tired, but I've seen too many crocodile-themed prophecies tired. The kind of tired that only comes from living a disturbingly epic life. He summoned his court. The vizier brought paperwork. The priest brought incense. The baboon brought a pillar. The pharaoh waved them all away. "I have built pyramids. I have eaten divine dip. I have danced with mummies. I have yelled at the sun. I am ready." The royal nap chamber was prepared. Silk sheets, golden mattress, a lullaby sung by 300 harpists. The pharaoh lay down. He whispered, "Let history be weird." And then he napped. For 1,000 years, tourists came. They admired his peaceful face. They asked, was he wise? The guide replied, "He once mistook a scroll for hummus." The pharaoh's tomb was inscribed with his final decree: "Let future rulers be bold, be strange, be And so ended the disturbing, delightful, and deeply drowsy life of the pharaoh. And so, dear reader, the sands have settled. The pyramids stand tall. The baboon is retired. The dip is still legendary. The pharaoh naps on, wrapped in dreams of fig and garlic, while history snoozes beside him, occasionally snoring in hieroglyphs. If you've journeyed through this disturbingly delightful tale, may your own life be just strange enough to be memorable, and just peaceful enough to be Now tuck yourself in, light a candle of wisdom, and remember, even the mightiest ruler needs a blanket. Good night. Like and subscribe for more ancient nonsense.